Sammy Wilson.
And can I welcome? I think this is the first time I've had a chance to speak while you've been in the chair. And given your generosity, I'm really glad to see that you have taken the chair, and wish you all the best for the future. Look forward to future generosity. And that's the end of my crawling, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I also congratulate the two members who have made their maiden speeches here today? But could I say to the member for Coatbridge, Christon and Bells Hill, he really shouldn't have this kind of Jimmy No Friends paranoia about this place. We in the DUP are the cousins of the members from Scotland. Indeed, there's only 20 miles of water separate my constituency from Scotland, and while we don't share their desire to break up the Union, nevertheless we do regard them as cousins, so he shouldn't feel that he's loathed by everyone in this House. And can I congratulate them on their speeches. Madam Deputy Speaker, could I just say a number of things? First of all, we welcome many of the aspirations in this budget. We welcome the fact that the government is committed to growth and to balanced growth across the United Kingdom. We welcome the measures which are designed to increase productivity, because of course that is one way in which we can have living standards raised for those who are in work. We welcome the commitment to making work pay, because I don't want to see my constituents confined to a life of no work without the dignity and the esteem that gives them. And therefore I think that making work pay is important, and getting people into jobs. And of course, given the threats that there are to the United Kingdom and indeed to the world in many theatres of war across the world, and the demands which we make upon our armed forces, we welcome the 2% commitment to defence spending. However, I've got to say, I do have a number of concerns about what's in the budget. And whilst I hope that the Chancellor is right in his growth forecasts, I think that he himself raised a number of warnings about the situation in Europe and what would happen with Greece and the impact that could have on a major export market, the situation in China. And yet, despite that, the budget is based, or part of the growth forecasts in the budget are based upon exports growing, on average, over the next 5 years, 7 times more than what they grew this year. And, you know, if that is one of the components of economic growth, then we've got to say that there is a huge risk factor there. It's also based on consumer spending being the main driver of growth. And, of course, consumer spending is the main part of GDP. But if that consumer spending against a period with wages not growing, etc., that consumer spending can only be brought about by increased borrowing. And we have already seen in the past the impact of unsustainable domestic and private borrowing on the economy. And so there are warning signs there. And, you know, even when it comes to some of the incentives for industry to grow, and it has been mentioned by a number of members here today, there isn't any great mention of what we do about energy prices. And it really doesn't matter whether you're talking about old, what people would call old industries, whether that's kind of steel manufacturing or whatever, or even the modern data processing industries. All of them are huge energy consumers. And yet if you look at one of the things which has been driving up energy prices most, the environmental taxes, they're set over the next 5 years to grow by 3 times. From, I think I have the figure here, from 5.6 billion to 16.1 billion. So there are a number of factors in this budget which do cause concerns as to the Chancellor's predictions. The other concern that I have is, whilst there's the rhetoric about the regions, and may I welcome the fact that the government believes that the only way to secure a truly national recovery is through fundamental rebalancing of the British economy based on investment across the regions, driven by private sector and further devolution to increase local decision making. A great sentiment. In relation to Northern Ireland, I see nothing new here. The Chancellor has said that he is committed to the delivery of the Stormont House Agreement. The Stormont House Agreement is nearly now, well, it's 9 months old. It hasn't been delivered on. And that's the fault not of the government, I've got to say, that's the fault of the SDLP and Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland. But if that's what he's relying on, there's nothing new in this budget. And indeed, if you even look at what one of the drivers that there could be, government investment, the growth in government investment is set to fall by 50% over the period of this budget. And already we know that in Northern Ireland that means there will be a cut in capital expenditure for this year and for subsequent years, the details of which and the timing of which is still to be told to us by the Treasury and in negotiations with the Department of Finance in Northern Ireland. So there are worrying factors about this. The other issue which I suppose I have some concern about is the proposals for the change in tax credits. It is one thing to say that we want to shift the burden of paying for workers from the state to employers, and that's good. But there is no point in saying we're going to make the state reductions immediate, but we will then rely upon employers increasing or filling the gap in the longer term. All that does is leave people poorer. And of course, given the fact that you're usually talking about the low-paid unemployed, and here's another downward factor, to take £1 off a low-paid person probably has a downward multiplier of about 5 times, because they tend to spend all of their money, they tend to spend it all on things which are produced locally in local shops, that don't spend it on expensive imported luxury goods, and so it can have a downward effect on the local economy. And I would like to, in response, to hear from the Chancellor what assessment he has made of the impact which this is likely to have in the short term. In the long term, it may well be that it does shift the burden but to employers. But in the short term, I suspect it will shift it to the worker. And first of all, that's morally not right, and secondly, it's economically not right either. I do welcome, however, the decrease in corporation tax rates. That, in fact, may well make it, once we get around to delivering on that part of the Stormont House Agreement in Northern Ireland, that will make the delivery of the reduction in corporation tax which we propose in the Northern Ireland Assembly that much cheaper, and indeed may even enable us to bring corporation tax down to 10% to make us more competitive with our neighbours in the Irish Republic. The one thing which I have great concern about are the welfare reform changes. Not that all of them we disagree with. Some of them we do disagree with, and disagree with fundamentally. Whilst we support the reduction in the cap, I think that this budget, and people from the north, representatives from the north of England, from Scotland, from Wales, ought to be concerned about the proposal to have a different cap for areas outside London. Because I believe that that is a first step towards a regionalisation of benefits. And that will be detrimental to many of those of us who represent poorer regions of the United Kingdom. And once you get that foot in the door will be pushed further. And whilst we support, had there been a universal reduction of the cap, and the rationale for it that the government has given, I think that, as we did in the last Parliament, we could have considered giving support to it. But we certainly cannot give support to this. And I will give way, yes, I'll give way.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. I wonder if you're aware that around the time of the referendum in Scotland, a guarantee was given by the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, I believe it was at the time, that there would be no change, there would be no different regional rates. And now we find them being introduced. Was the Honourable Member aware of that?
Well, I wasn't aware that that commitment was given, but I do see the danger in the proposal that we have before us today, and I think that it's one which members, and even members on the other side, who represent areas which are not so well off and which are heavily dependent upon welfare payments ought to have some concern about. The last point I want to make is that I believe that, and this is really for a message for people in Northern Ireland, I believe that, and I'll say this to the Chancellor as well though, the additional welfare reform changes which have to be implemented at Stormont, and which I believe will continue to be resisted by Sinn Féin and the SDLP, who unfortunately have a blocking mechanism, could bring an end to the Stormont Assembly, because it will leave us with an unsustainable budget, probably another gap of £300 to £400 million. And the message I give to the government is this: they cannot pussyfoot around any longer with those who refuse to do the job that they're meant to do in Northern Ireland, i.e. put through legislation which they had promised to put through anyway over 7 months ago. The Labour Party agree with us on that. The Conservative Party agree with us on that. If there is an action, then I believe that it will be essential to save the devolved Assembly for the government to step in. I'll give way, yeah.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. And on that very important point, isn't the irony here that those who shout loudest about resisting cuts to welfare are the people who are inflicting more pain on vulnerable people by taking money out of other budgets? And secondly, they're not here, Sinn Féin, to take their seats, to represent their people and vote against it where it matters. So all of it amounts to hot air when it comes to the reality of the situation.
And indeed, that's the last point I was going to make, that whilst there are those who complain that we're in the pockets of the Tories, we actually come here to raise the concerns. We will be here to exercise our vote, while those who are putting the institutions in Northern Ireland in jeopardy are absent, silent, powerless and ineffective on behalf of the vulnerable in Northern Ireland. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to conclude my remarks by saying that we take the good parts of this budget and we will support the government on those. But those that cause us concern, those that we believe have a detrimental impact in Northern Ireland, then of course we will argue against.
Hear, hear, hear.
Robertson.